Hey, what's up, guys? Here to talk about fantasy football again. So, last video I did the NFC East, so now we're going to move on to the next division in the NFC East, which is the NFC North. A lot of explosive offenses in this division, and that means a lot of good fantasy production. So, let's go ahead and start previewing it. So, first team I'm going to start with is the Chicago Bears. So, Chicago Bears won the division last year. Had a really surprised a lot of people. A lot of people didn't think they'd be great, but the addition of Khalil Mack really made that defense elite. And then Mitch Trubisky took the next step forward to really lead this offense. So a lot of expectations now on the Bears that weren't previously there. So let's take a look at their schedule. They start off, they're home against the Green Bay Packers on Thursday night, so first game of the season. Then they go to Denver, to Washington, and then they host Minnesota, and then two great matchups, Oakland and then New Orleans. So kind of up and down. There's some good matchups and then some kind of iffy matchups. And then around the time of fantasy playoffs, you got the Dallas Cowboys, and then a great close to the fantasy playoffs with on the road against the Packers and then hosting the Kansas City Chiefs. So potentially some good matchups down the stretch for them offensively. So let's start at quarterback. Their quarterback was Mitch Trubisky last year. Mitch Trubisky started off poorly, and a lot of people, there were a lot of questions about like whether or not he was deserving of that hype that he got taken with the number 2 draft pick with. But then he really turned it around in the second half and played a lot better and ended up being the 15th best quarterback last year. So. All in all, a decent season, especially considering a guy that wasn't drafted for the most part, and then ended up filling a void on your team if you needed a quarterback. And so overall, Mitch Trubisky, I like him. He's a guy that's not really going to go very high. He's still not really viewed as an elite quarterback, so he's probably going to slip into the later part of the draft. And He's obviously got potential. He was taken above Patrick Mahomes and Deshaun Watson, so he's got that kind of potential to be an elite quarterback. And he's in a system that is very can't think of the word, but it's conducive to his development as a future quarterback because it involves a lot of plays around him running the ball and throwing it in short passes. Basically, this offense is kind of designed like the Kansas City Chiefs because if you remember, Matt Nagy, their head coach, is a former assistant of Andy Reid during the Alex Smith era. So this offense is kind of designed similar to the Chiefs, and there's a lot of upside for Trubisky to take the next step forward. So that being said, if he's there at the end of the draft, this is not a bad take if you want to stock up on your other positions first because he could continue to improve if last year was a sign of things to come for him. So let's take a look at the weapons that he has. So on the running back, this team, a couple changes. They had Jordan Howard, who was kind of expected to be the lead back, but he did not play very well, and now he's traded to the Eagles. But they returned Tariq Cohen, who this guy was huge for their offense. In PPR leagues, he was the number 11 running back and really produced a lot of value relative to his draft position. So he is expected to be the lead back this year, and his complementary backups, which are probably going to be more of the straight up the line first down backs, are Mike Davis, who they got from Seattle. He was productive at times last year. And then they drafted David Montgomery, who's a rookie in the 3rd round that they got from, I believe, Iowa State. I think that's right. But so what do you make of this situation? So I do like Tariq Cohen. I think that he's going to produce similar value to last year. And I think he's somebody that if he falls to you, and especially if you're in a PPR league, this is a great snag, especially if you want to shore up some receivers first, kind of like I did in my mock draft. In fact, I took Tariq Cohen in that video. You can go back and watch it from a few weeks ago. Mike Davis is okay. I think that early in the season I see him as kind of the Jordan Howard fill-in, maybe get some goal line touchdowns. But long term, I think David Montgomery is the guy that they're going to try to integrate into the system. He was very productive in his year at Iowa, during his time at Iowa State, and I believe that they're going to try to incorporate him more in the offense, but probably later on. So don't He's going pretty high in drafts because a lot of people believe that he can take over the running back role, but I'd expect it to take some time. And then they also got a guy named Kareth White Jr., who this guy ran a 4.37. So I don't really see him being somebody that you would draft at all, but this is somebody to keep an eye on because they may try to include him on some of their trick plays because, like I said, they're kind of like the Chiefs and they like speedy guys, change of direction type plays. So he could be very effective for them. Wide receiver, I really don't like Bears wide receivers because they're kind of all over the place. They don't really have a ton of consistency. Their lead guy is Allen Robinson. He had some very good games at times, but very inconsistent. Taylor Gabriel, another guy that they had threw some deep bombs to, but really was not somebody you could really rely on through the whole season. And then the guy that I actually think that I like is Anthony Miller. I believe he's going into his second or third year. I can't remember. But he's the guy that has the potential to take over the lead receiver role because he was a relatively high draft pick in his early back when he was drafted. So maybe he can kind of start to fill the former Alshon Jeffrey role that they had. Cordero Patterson, another receiver they just picked up for the Patriots. He's interesting, but I mean, he's kind of getting a little older, so I don't really know how like consistently involved he's going to be. But again, another change of pace guy they'll throw in there. And then Riley Ridley, their draft pick. This is a big 6'2" receiver. He's kind of like a possession type guy potentially for them out of Georgia. I like this guy potentially as maybe like a red zone target, but I don't really know what his role is going to be on this offense, so I would not take him high. Or actually, I probably wouldn't draft him at all unless you're in like a 20-team league or something like that. But somebody to keep an eye on to potentially step up. Tight ends. So last year, Trey Burton, their tight end, he had a very productive year. He was the number 8 tight end. Although he didn't necessarily stand out among the rest of the tight end pack. He was not a particularly high draft pick, so he gave you decent value for what he was worth. I do like him to potentially improve on his numbers and maybe be in the top 5. But the thing that I would caution you about is that they also have Adam Shaheen, who is a relatively high draft pick from 2 years ago. And he is somebody that he kind of got a little involved towards the end. And maybe he'll start to kind of take some of the touches away from Trey Burton. So like keep in mind, this team likes to involve multiple players on their offense. They don't have any... Unlike the Kansas City Chiefs, who have very elite players at those skill player positions, the Bears do not really have elite players, and they like to use their depth to their advantage. And I think that possibly that could happen to Trey Burton. So I have concerns about him going into next year. All right. So big point of discussion here, Bears defense. So Bears defense was the best defense last year. So but how high or do you take them in this draft? So there's going to be somebody who reaches for the Bears, and I think that what's probably going to happen, I do think the Bears defense is going to be good. I think they're going to be, they got stronger. They added Clinton Dix. But the thing with them is that somebody's going to reach for them probably too high, and it's really not going to be worth it, I think, to play that game of potentially sacrificing a guy at a running back or receiver that could be more helpful to you. So I would personally don't fall into the trap of taking the Bears like in the 5th round or something, because like you never know, like if they get a lot of injuries, they might not replicate the same value as last year. Like let's say anything happens to Khalil Mack, then that instantly hurts their value. So don't reach too high for this. In fact, I'd let somebody else take them first, but if they, for some reason, slip around to the area of the board, that would be a good time to take them. And then, okay, so you all are familiar, I'm sure, with their disaster at kicking last year in the playoffs. So Cody Parkey, he's not on the team anymore, but then they signed a guy named Blewett to kick for them. So, like, I feel like anytime you have a kicker named Blewett, like, they're just going to blow the kick. Like, it's like, oh, he blew it. So, like, why would you want that guy on your team anyway? I don't know. It's just such a bad situation. Like, I don't know. So many other kickers don't even waste your time. Anyway, so the next team is the Detroit Lions. So Detroit, they have a good offense, but they're not a very good season last year and not really expected to have a great season this year either. So they start off a good matchup against Arizona. Then they host the Los Angeles Chargers. They go to Philadelphia, home against Kansas City, at Green Bay versus Minnesota. So good little stretch there in the middle, but kind of up and down. And then at the end of the season, they have at Minnesota versus Tampa Bay. That's a nice matchup. And then at Denver. So mixed bag. So this offense, I think, will be good. So their quarterback starts with Matthew Stafford. Matthew Stafford, he's a relatively hyped quarterback that usually is taken at the end of the draft, but he was not very good last year. He was only the 19th ranked quarterback. And the problem is that the Lions are so far down these games that he's usually throwing bombs down the field, and he threw a lot of interceptions. He also does not give you anything in terms of running the football. The overall team has gotten worse now that they don't have as many elite targets. Just avoid Matthew Stafford because there's so many other younger quarterbacks that are better out there that you could probably get better value for. I take Trubisky over Stafford any day, just as a comparison. And then to the running back, they have Kerryon Johnson. Kerryon Johnson showed a lot of potential last year, but he was not ranked particularly high because he was injured in the later part of the season. He's got a lot of potential in this offense. The question is how much is he going to be used? Because they signed C.J. Anderson, who kind of an older running back now, but he was productive down the stretch for the Rams, and I can see him kind of taking away some of his touches. And then they also have Theo Riddick, who at this point is just more of a nuisance than anything, especially in PPR, because he's going to be used as their third down back at times to catch passes. So who do you take among these guys? Kerryon I would take with expectations that he may not break out. C.J. Anderson, I mean, if you're at the end of the draft and you need a stopgap, maybe throw in as a handcuff, that's not bad. And Theo Riddick, only in PPR. But, I mean, just mostly focus on Kerryon Johnson. Don't really concern yourself too much with the other two. So, wide receivers. So, they have Kenny Golladay, talented young receiver who is returning and expected to be the number one guy. I expect him. Disappointed last year after Golden Tate was traded and Marvin Jones got hurt. He was expected to break out, and he really did not improve a lot from his numbers that he showed at the start of the season. But I think that Kenny Golladay, he's going into the season as the number one target, and he is a sleeper that I expect to potentially have a breakout year in his third year in the league. So a good guy to watch out for. And I think that this could potentially be a lot of value for you in the 4th or 5th round. Not a big name right now, but could sneak into the top 10 for this season. Marvin Jones, he was injured a lot of towards the later part of last year, but even when he was healthy, he really was not very consistent. But this team is going to be down a lot, so if you need some depth at the end, and you already have some solid options at receiver anyway, Marvin Jones is not bad, but he's already basically reached his peak. And then they have Danny Amendola. This guy's also on the decline, but I mean, this is a good situation for him. But still, you're not really getting a ton of upside. This is just more of a modest gain type pick, as I've discussed already. The potential, though, is a guy named Fulgham, who they got in the draft. I believe he went to Old Dominion. And this guy is another possession receiver. Matthew Stafford really likes throwing to those type of guys like Calvin Johnson, Kenny Golladay. And this guy has potential to maybe step up and be the number 2 wide receiver. So keep an eye out on this guy, especially in those 14, 16-team leagues. He could be a sleeper pick at the end of the draft that could really help you down the stretch. Tight end. So they drafted T.J. Hockenson out of Iowa with the number 8 pick. And obviously, you're thinking right to yourself, 8 is extremely high for tight end. And that's because this guy is basically hyped as the next Gronk. He is a big tight end, 6'4", great receiving skills and route running. So a lot of people think this guy is going to burst onto the scene, and I think he will be good, but I don't think that he's somebody that you should reach for because they also have Jesse James, who is a productive tight end that was with Pittsburgh last year. So I could see a situation where Hockenson kind of is slow to start, but then maybe picks up as the season goes along and is very productive. But just temper your expectations with him. Don't reach for this guy. Because of the fact that it's the Detroit Lions offense. But I do expect him at the end to have a decent value for you at the tight end position. Don't stay away from this defense. It's horrible. And then their kicker is Matthew Prater, who's okay, but I mean, there's a lot of other more efficient kickers out there you can get in the last round. All right, so that's my conclusion of the Detroit Lions. Now we go on to the Green Bay Packers. Green Bay, head coaching changes, and a lot of interesting players to consider on their team. So let's take a look at their schedule. They start out at the Chicago Bears, versus Minnesota, versus Denver, versus Philadelphia, versus Dallas. So kind of some tough games there. But then a nice stretch for the next three. They got Detroit, Oakland, and at Kansas City. So that could be great 3 games for you there. And then at the end of the season, they've got a pretty tough schedule. They've got the Washington Redskins at home. They've got the Chicago Bears at home, and then they go on the road to Minnesota. So consider that in your fantasy playoffs. That's a pretty tough schedule there. So let's start with my favorite player, Aaron Rodgers. And okay, so I bashed Aaron Rodgers a lot on this, and he is not a bad quarterback. I'm not saying that. He was the number 9 quarterback last year. Especially considering all the problems the team had, that's really not that bad. But the reason that I do not like Aaron Rodgers in fantasy football is because he's literally like one of those players that like he's reached a point where his hype is so great that he's never going to reach it. So he's always going to get reached by somebody really high. Like people reach for him in the first round because they're stupid, and he never will even reach that anymore. Like. I mean, to be honest, like, what has Aaron Rodgers done that's even earned elite status? Like, he had one good season where he went to the Super Bowl and won, and he's been, like, modest since then and he's just never been back to the Super Bowl. Like, you know what I mean? Like Russell Wilson has arguably done more than him, and he never gets talked about. But anyway, so just let somebody take Aaron Rodgers. But if for some reason he drops to you, it's not bad. But I'm just saying that he's going to go higher than he's going to actually produce. So stay away from him for that reason only. Their running back, they have Aaron Jones as their running back. And Aaron Jones is solid. He had a decent stretch to last year, end of the season last year, even though he kind of ended the season hurt. And then at the beginning of the season, he was suspended. So overall, he's a guy that I think could have a very good season and is somebody that is also going to go late in the draft and could be good value for you to potentially be a top 10 running back. Because this offense, I think the coaching staff is realizing that this is easily their best running back. They're giving him more of the 3-down back role. I really like Aaron Jones for next season. A good handcuff, though, behind him is Jamal Williams, who he was not very efficient at times last year, but he is solid when he needs to be, and consider him as a handcuff if you're in deep leagues. And then another interesting guy is Dexter Williams they got out of Notre Dame. I don't really see him being a huge value other than in case any of these guys get hurt. And, and then wide receivers. So Devontae Adams is their receiver, and he's clearly the number 1 on this team. I personally like him. I would say the number 2 wide receiver. I like DeAndre Hopkins a little more, but Devontae Adams is very close, and I think this guy will be getting a lot of targets from Aaron Rodgers. And I think this team is going to end up being down in a lot of games because their defense is not good. And I could see them throwing it a lot to Adams and him putting up a monster season. So I like Devontae Adams. You definitely want to take him potentially over some of these running backs that'll be on the board around the same time as him. Another guy that I really like on this team is Geronimo Allison. Geronimo Allison, he was hurt most of last season, so he didn't really put up a great overall numbers value, but when the 4 games that he was healthy before he started dealing with injuries, he was averaging 10 points a game in standard. So then you start factoring in all the PPR points. Then you start factoring the fact that like he's going to have a full season of being healthy and more experienced. And I think this guy could be a breakout candidate. He's going to fall in the draft because a lot of people don't really know who he is, but he's a guy that I think will be great value for you in the second half of the draft. Some other interesting players that were productive at times but not the most consistent are Marquez Valdez-Scantling and Equanimous St. Brown, which is literally my favorite name in the NFL. So these guys are other people to keep an eye out on, especially if anything were to happen to Devontae Adams. I think that these guys could step up and be a huge value for you. And then another guy to consider, Jake Kumaro, is somebody who showed potential last year as well. All right, tight end. So another hype name that goes way too high than he should is Jimmy Graham. So Jimmy Graham considering the other tight ends in the league, he wasn't bad. He was tied for 11th last year with Vance McDonald. But this guy is now 32. He's another guy that's going to go a lot higher than he's anticipated, especially when you factor in the Green Bay Packers, Aaron Rodgers hype. And I just think you should overall avoid him because of that. And the other thing is that they drafted a tight end named, I think Jake Sternberger is his name. Jake, I believe is his first name, but his last name's Sternberger. And this guy was pretty productive at a Texas A&M last year and taken in the 3rd round. So I like this guy to potentially steal some of Jimmy Graham's targets as the season goes along. And I think that limits Jimmy Graham's value. So I personally wouldn't take either of these two, but Sternberger is definitely got to keep an eye out on, especially if anything happens to Jimmy Graham or any of those receivers that I talked about. Avoid this defense. And then their kicker is Mason Crosby. Mason Crosby is, for the most part, solid, but need I remind you that he had a game last year where he missed 4 field goals. In fact, I think maybe it was 5. So this is a guy that's getting older, and just temper your expectations with him as well. All right, so the last team in this division, the Minnesota Vikings. Minnesota, pretty good offense, but kind of didn't really live up to expectations down the stretch last year. They start out at Atlanta. That's a great matchup. Then Green Bay, then Oakland. So those first 3, those are money. You want to take advantage of that if you can. Then they go to Chicago. So then things start kind of getting tough again. Then they got the Giants, the Eagles, and Detroit. So overall, a very favorable beginning of the season. And then at the end of the season, they got Detroit Lions at the Chargers and home against the Packers. So those could potentially be 3 great playoff games. So keep that in mind as well. Their quarterback is Kirk Cousins. Kirk Cousins was great to start last season, but then I don't know what happened in the second half. He just did not perform at all. The guy in clutch games never shows up. But overall, number 11 quarterback last year, not bad. He's a guy to consider at the end of the draft. I think a lot of people are down on him now, and he's gonna be there at the end, and I don't think that would be a bad take for you as long as you got the other positions shored up. Running back. So the running back is Dalvin Cook, and this guy has battled injuries throughout his career, but when he was healthy last season, he dealt with a hamstring injury, so he didn't really overall have great numbers, but when he was healthy, he was very productive. And I think that as long as this guy could stay healthy, which is a big if, he could be great value for you. But he is so talented that his stock is high usually, and I think he could still be pretty high. So keep an eye out. Don't reach around him. I'd rather personally have, if you're going to consider guys that will go around the same place, I'd take Adam Thielen over Cook any day. Thielen, I'm going to get to in a bit though. But if anything were to happen to Cook, a guy to consider is, I believe his name is Alexander Madison. Alexander, I believe, is his first name, but his last name is Madison. He's a guy out of Boise State, very productive for them, and he's going to be like a first and second down back. Could fill into Dalvin Cook's role and be very productive, rookie running back. And then they've also got some other talented guys that in there as well, like Amir Abdullah and Boone, that I don't think are good for fantasy, but people to keep an eye out on. If anything injury-wise happens. Wide receivers. So, good topic of debate here. Adam Thielen or Stefon Diggs. And personally, I like Adam Thielen more than Diggs. I think Diggs is a better, more explosive target, or a more explosive overall player. But Thielen is so much more consistent, and Diggs is kind of battles injuries, and he either has like a great game or just does nothing. So I really like Adam Thielen. I think that he was a top 3 receiver for the first half of last year, and then when Cousins' play went down, that kind of hurt Thielen, so he only ended up being number 7 overall. Diggs was number 10 overall, but a lot of that was up and down kind of play. I mean, they're both solid takes though, but just understand that some of the factors I talked about with them. But Cousins loves them, and they're going to get a lot of targets again next season. Laquan Treadwell, this guy, he's been disappointing. I mean, he's a first-round draft pick, really has not done anything to take advantage of that. So he's kind of, I think this is probably his last chance to really like prove anything. But now he's pretty clearly the number 3 receiver on this team, and he's probably he might start getting some targets. So, but personally, like there's upside there, but he's already had upside and not taken advantage of it. So I would personally not waste your time with him. There's some other guys that I wouldn't draft or anything, but just to keep an eye out on. Chad Beebe and I don't know his first name, but his name's Zylstra. I mean, these are guys that were on the team and built consistency. And the only reason I say that is that they're not particularly like hyped up guys, but consider that Adam Thielen was an undrafted guy that became an elite receiver. I mean, these guys will probably get opportunities, especially if Treadwell continues to be a bust, that maybe these guys could step up and kind of start to have a role on this team. They also got an interesting player out of Oregon named Mitchell, so that's somebody else to keep an eye on in that receiving core. Because there's going to be a ton of opportunity with them because this is a very pass-focused offense with Kirk Cousins. So their tight end is Kyle Rudolph. Kyle Rudolph was the number 7 tight end last year, but you have to consider that because he just exploded in week 17 last year. But for the most part, other than that, he was pretty much useless. But because the whole tight end landscape last year was bad, he overall didn't fare too poorly. But they also just got a second-round pick out of Alabama named Irv Smith. So I mean, that's going to take some of his targets away. So I would look elsewhere than Kyle Rudolph, personally. But, I mean, that's just my take. This is overall a solid defense. Battled some injuries last year, but in 2017, these guys were elite and were a very reliable defense for you in fantasy football. So I'm personally, I think they go a little higher than their value is because there's so many good offenses in this division, but this is a defense to consider that I think they could have a bounce back season and have a pretty good value for you. So worth taking if you're in the region of needing them and you got the other positions shored up. All right, so their kicker is Dan Bailey. Dan Bailey is a solid kicker with the Cowboys, but I mean, he's just captured the Minnesota curse, I guess. I don't know if it's stuff in the water there with those kickers or what the deal is, but the kickers there just can't kick. I don't know what the problem is, but he was just so inefficient last year. So I mean, could he turn around? Maybe, but I don't know. There's just something wrong there. I would just look elsewhere personally. I mean, he might end up getting cut by the end of the season too. So. Yeah. But anyway, so that's the NFC North. So let me know if you have any questions or comments about any of this stuff, and I'll be happy to answer it. And next video, I'm going to go over the NFC South. Probably the most explosive fantasy division in football, and we'll get into all that and break down the players of who to look out for there. So, cool. Well, thanks for watching. Bye.